we want to look at this idea of Mary Magdalene being supposedly Jesus' girlfriend. I don't know how else to say that, but I don't know how else to say it, right? There is a entire belief system out there. In fact, the movie Da Vinci Code. Anyone see the Da Vinci Code? All right. I'm going to get to that in a second, but let me start off with this. You might find this true about you, and I found this true to me, but how many of you guys are on Facebook? Okay, most of us are on Facebook. There are very particular kinds of posts that I find myself reading. I don't read through every single post, all right? Depending, and I know sometimes when I should be working and it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I've zoned out. Instead of working, I'm on Facebook. I don't usually read every post. There are certain kinds of posts that catch my attention. I generally will ignore a written post, especially if it's a run-on sentence. If it's like a quick sentence, I'll read that, but if it's a run-on, I'll just scroll past it. But I'll usually pause whenever I see a nice picture, someone captured, especially if it's a picture of a friend of mine or his family and they're on vacation or they're doing something. I'll pause and I'll look at the picture. Or if it's a video, right, I'll watch the video, especially if it's a homemade video, or if it's a meme, right? Those are always fun, right? I'll pause and read that, right? I love that little baby who's just like woke up at 2 this morning and my mom did it, like some weird face like that. I love those memes. However, I think what really piques my curiosity on Facebook whenever I'm scrolling through these posts is usually when a friend of mine changes their status from single to in a relationship. And that's usually when I get into Facebook stalker mode. Right? Because I want to know who this person is. I'm going on their Facebook looking at their profile because I want to be able to tease my friend when I see him about, whoa, dude, you're seeing somebody? Tell me about this dude, right? Because I'm excited for them, genuinely excited for them. Another status that also catches my attention on Facebook is when those same friends change their status from in a relationship to it's complicated. I think that is just pure genius by Facebook to come up with that tag, isn't it? Like Facebook has come up with a safe system to protect everyone from embarrassment. So instead of having to admit that the guy you're seeing broke up with you because you said you were in love with him 3 minutes after your first date, now you can just say it's complicated, right? No one has to know you have issues, right? Or instead of having to say I broke it off with her because with him because when we finally met, I realized that his online profile picture was from 13 years ago. You can now just say it's complicated, right? I love that, right? It's a way to put things this way, both you and him are temporarily shielded from the looks and judgment of your Facebook stalker friends, right, who want to know how in the world you two thought you were fit for each other in the first place. Well, speaking of relationship statuses, did you know that there are some ancient documents that are currently in existence that would describe Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene as it's complicated? In fact, there are some ancient documents in existence today that would outright describe Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene as being in a relationship. And those documents are called, or are known as the Gnostic Gospels. Some of you guys have heard of the Gnostic Gospels. All right, we got some Bible folks here. The Gnostic, it's spelled, looks like Gnostic, but it's Gnostic Gospels. Now, the word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which really means knowledge. Now, in the case of the Gnostic Gospels, it's referring to the so-called hidden knowledge that's available only to those who are enlightened. That's what the Gnostics would often teach. In fact, the authors of the Gnostic Gospels believed that man's greatest problem was not sin or that he needed mercy from God, but man's greatest need was for self-knowledge, self-actualization, and in fact, higher knowledge. That the way you get saved is by attaining a secret knowledge that only a few can attain. Needless to say, these so-called Gospels hold a distinctly different view of Jesus, salvation, pretty much every major Christian doctrine than what the Bible teaches. And in fact, those Gnostic Gospels have been rejected as part of the Bible. Now, to give the Gnostics or the Gnostic Gospels a sense of legitimacy, and it's weird to be talking about Gnosticism and you're like, what does it have to do with me? It has to do with you because in a few weeks, in a few months, in a few years, you'll get in a conversation with a friend of yours who will tell you about the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Philip, which are actually books in the Gnostic Gospels that the Gnostics decided, they just decided that in order to make their books or give them a feeling of legitimacy, the Gnostics actually attached names of apostles to those books. How many of you guys have heard of the Gospel of Thomas? Maybe not read it, but you heard it. Gospel of Philip? Did you know Mary Magdalene had her own gospel? Apparently so. Apparently there's the Gospel of Judas also. Now, what's of interest to us for tonight's message as it pertains to this idea that Jesus and Mary had some sort of secret relationship, which is very pronounced in these Gospels. What's of interest to us tonight is really one particular section in the Gospel of Philip, or the so-called Gospel of Philip. And by the way, none of these authors actually wrote this, but they just attached their names to it. The Gnostics did. Here's what it says in the Gospel of Philip about Jesus and Mary. It says there were three who always walked with the Lord, Lord being Jesus. Mary, his mother, and her sister, and Magdalene, the one who was called his companion. But Christ loved her. That's Mary Magdalene. But Christ loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on the lips. Now, this is where you're supposed to go, what? Anybody want, here you go, thank you, one person, what? Right? Now, let me say this. Something to keep in mind about the Gnostic Gospels, first of all, is this, that these ancient documents were found in 1945. They were probably written a long, long time ago, centuries ago, but they were actually found in 1945, and they were found by really a shepherd boy who was out playing around, and he came across this cave, and in that cave, he found these Gnostic Gospels in papyrus, and they were hidden in earthenware jars. And so historians dug them up, and some of them had been burned, some had been discovered, a number of them were still intact. Whatever the case is, they got these documents and translated them to English, keeping in mind that a lot of sections in this document were either burned or disfigured, and so they had to kind of find words to fit in certain sections. I pull that out, or I make that point to say, the statement about Jesus kissing her on her lips is actually one of those sections in the papyrus that's missing. And so they don't know what it says. It literally says Jesus kissed her on the blank, 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 and then continue. And so they just decided to fill what lips make sense to us, and they put it in there. Very well could have been Jesus kissed her on her forehead or on her hand, as he would with the other disciples. But keep in mind, we're talking about the Gnostic Gospels here. There's an author by the name of Mary Thompson. And Mary Thompson has written a book called Mary of Magdala. And in that book, here's what she writes. She says, since there is no hint of such a relationship between Mary and Jesus in the canonical Gospels, that's in our Gospels in the Bible, the above quotations I just read from the Gospel of Philip need to be understood as part of a highly romanticized and fictional picture based in the composite figure of three women conflated into the understanding of Mary Magdalene as the repentant sinner. In other words, these authors are basically taking the different women in the Bible who they think might be Mary and combining all of them together with Mary Magdalene and saying, no, that's who she really was. And they're trying to make or let me put it this way, people are reading into it what they want, and what they want is a romanticized version of Jesus and Mary going steady. Or as is true of today's news media, frankly, that kind of news sells, right? How controversial and how much books could you sell if, maybe Jesus was seeing Mary Magdalene? Now, these writings have been around for a very long time, and many people have known about it. However, this so-called relationship or hidden secret relationship between Mary and Jesus really came to the forefront of our attention in 2006 when a book was made into a movie, and the book was titled The Da Vinci Code, and it was made into a movie in 2006 starring Tom Hanks as a Harvard professor who was the prime suspect of a gruesome murder. How many of you guys either read the book, The Da Vinci Code, or saw the movie, The Da Vinci Code? Now, here's what's fascinating. It's actually an interesting read. Unbiblical, but it's a fascinating read. Now, just so you know, at the very beginning of the book, Dan Brown, the author himself, says this is a fictional book. Having said that, in the first few pages when he says that, he also claims that the facts within it, including the dates and documents and historical figures, are true, which, of course, you hear that, and he's somehow mixing fact with myth, and it gets all jumbled up in people's minds, and so they start questioning if, in fact, the Bible is true. So, if you haven't watched the movie yet, let me set it up for you. Let me give you some novel ideas from the movie and from the book that kind of shapes this understanding or this false understanding that Jesus and Mary might have been in a relationship. And we'll deal with what the reality is within a second. But here's what it says, or here's kind of a big picture of what the book, the background story for the book's about. Here it is. Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, and they had a daughter. Jesus intended for Mary Magdalene to lead the church, but Peter had a problem with that. Thus, Mary was declared a prostitute and cut out of the role of leadership. So after Jesus was crucified, Mary disappeared with her child, resurfacing in Gaul. And if this theory were true, descendants of Jesus could still be alive today. And that's where you go, ooh. Now let me just say this before we even get into this. And I'm not here to so much to even defend this, but here's the fact of the matter. Christianity, from its very beginnings, has always had to deal with false teachers and false doctrines. All right, that's, in fact, the epistles where Paul is writing to the church, he's talking to them about false teachers who've somehow crept into leadership in the church and leading people astray. So I say that to say, listen, this is not some big shocker that would shake the very foundations of Christendom. Those who belong to Jesus, I doubt, had any problems or were actually genuinely questioning their faith as a result of these so-called gospels. The church has stood the test of time and will continue to stand the test of time until Jesus comes. But until then, I think it's our biblical responsibility to address such rumors, because at some point you will have to talk with your friends about this. So with that, let's address, and here's what I want to do. I don't want to spend time looking at Dan Brown's book or the Gnostic Gospels and trying to unfold all the wrong theology. Rather, what I want to look at is in the Bible. And here's the interesting thing. I met a friend of mine, or not a friend, I met a guy, we were playing basketball, and he says he wants to go to seminary and study other world religions so he can defend the gospel. And I applauded him for that, because I think anyone who desires to go into ministry, I think that's a great thing. I think it's beautiful. But I remember when he said that, something came to mind. I thought, you want to better defend the gospel, and so you're going to study other world religions in order to do that. And I thought, that's kind of backwards. And I remembered something that, I forget who said this, but it was the whole idea of how, do you know how FBI agents identify counterfeit money? They study the real thing. They study it, everything about it, so that they know it in and out. So that way, when they come across false documents, they can easily identify it. And I thought, man, that is so true for the gospel, wouldn't it? Like, if you want to know what's false, I think it's dumb to try and study don't get me wrong. I think, yes, it's good to kind of study other religions, to kind of have some understanding about it. But I think in order to defend the gospel, study the gospel. And understand it and know it so clearly, so when you identify something or when you come across something that's not in alignment with it, you can better call it out. Whatever the case is, that's what we're going to do tonight. We're actually going to look at what the Bible says about Mary Magdalene, and from there we're going to try and discern what's fact, what's myth, what's fiction, and hopefully address some of the issues that the questions that the translators of the Gnostic Gospels and Dan Brown and Da Vinci Code raises. And so some of the questions we want to address tonight is this. Were Jesus and Mary Magdalene really a couple? Were they a couple? Does the Bible give us any hint about this? Is there something in the Bible that we missed that might suggest that Jesus and Mary were in a relationship? Do they have a secret relationship that the church has tried to put under wraps? Oh, and here's a good one. If Jesus and Mary were indeed in a relationship, is that so bad? Right? I mean, after all, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 22 says, he who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. So what's the big deal, right? We'll address that. So let's jump right in. There are at least 12 accounts in the Bible, and I'm not going to list them all out for you. I can give them to you if you want them at the end. There are at least 12 different accounts in the Bible where the names of Mary Magdalene is mentioned in the same sentence with Jesus Christ. In fact, there are always a number of other women whose names are mentioned in the same account. And so you find in the Gospels that Mary Magdalene, whenever her name is mentioned, she's always in close proximity to Jesus, which I'm guessing is probably where some of these rumors started. And it would seem odd that in that culture, a woman would be so close to Jesus all the time. In fact, on the surface, it does seem a little out of place because rabbis, that's teachers in Jesus' day, would not have tolerated such openness towards women, nor the honor that came with such direct association. I'm sure the feminist movement would have a field day with this, but back then, that was the fact of the matter. Women didn't usually spend time with rabbis. So in fact, Jesus broke with tradition in letting women travel with him. And in the Gospels, we find that several times where it says Jesus was with his 12 disciples and several women who came alongside him and helped him. Luke chapter 8, verse 1 to 3 spells that all out for you. And so they wonder, wait a minute, why is Mary always there? What's she always doing next to him? Why is she always hanging out with Jesus? Why's her name always mentioned? And the rumors start. Now, if you recall, if you've been with us in this series, and if you've not, I'll flesh it out for you, but how Mary and Jesus met in the first place, it happened in Luke chapter 8, verse 1 to 3. And if you understood how Jesus and Mary met for the first time, you'll begin to get a clear picture in your mind's eye why it is that Mary Magdalene is always so close to him, while she always wants to be right next to him, and why her name is constant in those 12 accounts in the Gospels. Now, if you weren't with us, here's a few details about Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is described for us in Luke chapter 8, verse 1 to 3 as having been possessed by how many demons? 7 demons. And we talked about that last week, about how scary that was to be possessed by one demon. How much more 7 demons? She spent the better part of her life under the tormenting possession of these demons. Now, I've never met a demon-possessed woman, or a demon-possessed man for that matter, but here's one thing I am certain of. They are not fun to be around. All right? I've seen enough movies, I've read enough from Scripture to know that I don't want to be spending some quiet one-on-one time with a demon-possessed person unless I'm praying for them that Jesus heal them. In fact, being around someone who is demon-possessed, who is explicitly demon-possessed, can be hazardous to your well-being. And I say that because when you look at another account in Acts chapter 19, verse 13 to 17, in that account we meet 7 men called the sons of Sceva. And those men apparently try to control one man who was demon-possessed. And that account says this one demon-possessed man beat these 7 grown men, beat them up so badly that these 7 grown men ran out of the house they were in butt naked, bleeding. One demon-possessed man against 7 people. And so you can only imagine how much worse Mary Magdalene would have been before she met Jesus. My point is, nobody wants to spend time with a demon-possessed woman, much less marry her or stay married to her. There's plenty of reason for us to believe that Mary Magdalene was perhaps either never married or married and separated from her husband for whatever reason. But you can understand why, right? Nobody wants to live in the same house with a woman who's possessed with 7 demons. In fact, in other accounts in the gospel, in Mark chapter 5, verse 1 to 6, and in Acts 26, verse 16, you'll find that demons have a tendency not only to possess and torture and torment people, but demons, one of the things that they do is they isolate people from community. And so we read of in the Gospels that there's a demon who possessed him. Actually, there's a number of demons that possessed this one man, and they locked him off away in a cemetery, place of death. And so they tend to kind of separate people and isolate people. So that means that until Jesus Christ came into Mary's life, think about that. That means that until Jesus Christ came into Mary's life, Mary would have been all alone, tormented, no friends, no husband, perhaps no family. She lived a tortured, lonely experience. Are you with me so far? I'm trying to set up a situation for you to understand why it is Mary stuck so close to Jesus. That's where I'm going here. So this is where she is. Tortured, alone. Nobody wants to be friends with someone who's possessed with 7. Only Lord knows what kinds of words came out of her mouth. She's the woman who people had rumors about, like, oh my goodness, don't go down that street. Don't spend time with her. Or she wants to come visit you, don't let her come. She's going to come to your party. Well, I'm not coming with my kids. She's that woman. Nobody wants to spend time with her. And not only does no one want to spend time with her, but she's tormented, by hounds of hell. Until one day Jesus comes into her town with his ragtag crew of 10 disciples. And the account says a few other women who apparently had their own emotional baggage they had come with. And they walk into town. Luke chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. Jesus comes into town, looks at Mary, sees beyond the surface, sees the demons behind her that are torturing her soul, commands the demons to leave her. The demons leave her. She's free. Perhaps Jesus says to Mary, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have light and life. Mary's free from demons because Jesus told those demons to leave her alone. Now, I want you to go back to that moment, and I tried to do this last week, but go back to that moment where you spent your whole life under oppression. Let's even forget demon possession. If you spent your whole life struggling with one particular thing, whether it's a physical sickness or an ailment or an emotional problem, and you're suddenly free from it, which was what happened to Mary, and you no longer have to struggle with it, what do you think Mary would have done next when Jesus freed her from that demon, from those demons? Yeah, it probably would have started with an embrace. I am not letting you go anywhere. And I wonder if there's a part of her that might have thought, I'm not leaving Jesus, because if I leave him, those demons might come back. And so she perhaps embraces him. I'm going to propose that she not only embraced him and loved him and begged to stay with him, but she went right back home, got all her belongings, and said goodbye to that town forevermore, because I'm following Jesus. I'm not going back to my neighborhood where this all started. I am dedicating my life fully to this man. Not out of romantic infatuation. Are you with me on that? Not because she thought he was sexy or because she thought he looked good, but because out of great love and gratitude, she says, this man has life, and he alone has been able to free me from the oppression of demons. Now, here's something else to keep in mind. Remember where we're going here. I'm trying to paint a picture for why it is Jesus stuck so close. Where Mary stuck so close to Jesus, because these other accounts that talk about Mary and Jesus always say Mary's always next to her. What's going on? Why would a woman stick that closely to Jesus? Why is her name always highlighted? And that's where we're going again, okay? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Now, keep in mind, Jesus not only freed Mary from 7 demons, not only offered her eternal life, but practically speaking, you know what Jesus just did for her? He just provided her with a family. Remember, Mary probably has no one in her life who loves her anymore. If you've ever seen demon possession, I haven't, but I've read about it. They're not people you want to spend time with, and so we could surmise that people have abandoned her. And Jesus shows up with 12 men and a few other women. Women, by the way, who were also once demon-possessed, and Jesus had freed. Luke chapter 8, verse 1 and 3 says that. There were other women in the group who were once demon-possessed and rescued by Jesus. So imagine Mary being freed from this, coming to Jesus, and she meets one of the other Marys. And apparently there's another Mary. There's a woman named Clopas, and she meets them, and they say, hi, Mary, how are you? Now, I love this group because Mary, if Mary, kind of Mary came to Remix, and we said, hey, Mary, tell us how you came to know Jesus. And she's like, oh, I had 7 demons. We probably would not be, right? We would be, hey, Shax, you want to talk with her? Because I don't really know what to say. There'd be some intimidation. But if you've once also been demon-possessed, and someone else who's been demon-possessed come to you, you guys you connect immediately. Are you with me? You getting the picture here? And so could you imagine just one afternoon, she had no family, no friends, and all of a sudden the next day she has Jesus, and she has a family who've been through the same kind of pain. I think sometimes alcoholics or ex-alcoholics are the best ones who can reach out to new alcoholics, right? I think people who've struggled with certain types of sin are usually the best kinds of people who can identify with the people who struggle with sin, right? The guy who's been in jail and for a long time is the guy who could minister more effectively, I would propose, to young men who've been in jail, right? And I think that's what's happening with Mary here. Jesus provided her with an instant family. On top of that, not only is she freed from demons, not only does she has a new family, but she's got front row seats to hear Jesus teach. And if you've never thought about this, but the Bible says that whenever Jesus taught, the people were amazed because they'd never heard teaching like that. And that always stuck out with me. How many of you guys, who are some of your favorite Bible teachers? Don't say me. How many, wow, that was cocky. Who are some of your favorite Bible teachers? C.S. Lewis. Okay, who else? Francis Chan. Oh, I love Francis Chan. Who else? Matt Chandler, thank you. Why didn't anyone say him first? Give me one more. Mark Driscoll, right? Louis Giglio, right? Those are the 20-something pastors. Yeah, right? What's that? Stephen Furtick, right? Yeah, right. And when you hear those guys, it could be an hour sermon, and at the end of it, you're like, whoa, he's done? Now, I say that to set this up to say, it says when Jesus taught, people didn't go, oh, good sermon. It's that they were amazed. Like Jesus didn't quote other pastors, which is what the rabbis did. The rabbis would try to make one point and quote every other rabbi, and this is what this rabbi says, and this is what this rabbi says, and here's what I think it means. Jesus comes and says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus comes and says that if you have faith, they are in the garden, and the mustard seed falls to the ground, and Jesus says, if you have faith this small, your faith can move mountains. And Jesus is using physical creation to make every point. And the people are like, who is this? Like if Jesus had a church, it would be a mega church yesterday. Which is why he probably was always on the road, because he's like, they were crap, right? My point is, Mary was freed from demons. She had a new family, and she got to sit front row at Jesus' teachings. How amazing a life transformation. Are y'all getting a picture why it is that Mary stuck so close to Jesus? Why in the world would you ever want to leave that group? Like, think about it. What's her option? Where else is she going to go? Everyone in town thinks she's crazy. There's no mention of family around her. She got nowhere else to go. And so she sticks close with Jesus. Listen, did Mary Magdalene love Jesus with all her heart and her soul and her mind and her body? Absolutely. Was she mesmerized by his teachings and impressed with him as a man before she got to understand his divinity? Possibly. More likely than not. Was she infatuated with him romantically in the way that a high school teenage girl has a crush on a new guy out of town? There is zero evidence of that in the Bible. It just doesn't, it doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense in light of what Mary had been through. And unfortunately, it's this third part that so-called authors of the Gnostic Gospels and Dan Brown and whoever else has chosen to emphasize. Certainly, Mary loved Jesus, but not in the manner these authors paint it to be. And you know what I think the problem is? I think perhaps the problem comes with our understanding of the word love. In the English language, we have just one word for love. You know what it is? Yeah, it's love. That's it. Love, that's it. We use that word to describe everything from how we feel about the one person we want to spend the rest of our lives with to the brand new pair of boots you recently purchased on jcpenney.com. We use that same word to describe the brand new J.J. Abrams movie that's going to be released in the next few months. We use it to describe a sermon podcast of Matt Chandler or Francis Chan. We use that same word to describe that new hibachi spot downtown. We use that same word to describe how we feel about the King of Kings. Now, I'm not knocking on the English language. Frankly, it's all we got, right? But in comparison, the Hebrew and the Greek languages have a variety of words used to describe the word love, and it's fascinating. In fact, each one of those languages has 3 different words that they use to describe love, and each meaning is deeper than the next. And I'm going to try and work through this with you guys, and hopefully at the end of it, you begin to get a picture of what it truly means to love Jesus Christ with all your hearts, all your soul, and all your mind. Now, in the Hebrew language, there's 3 words in the Hebrew language, which the Old Testament was written in. There are 3 words that they use to describe the word love. There's the word dad. I'm going to write it all on the board, but let me give it to you first. There's the word dad, D-O-D. There's the word raya, and there's the word ahava. In the Greek, there's three words used to describe love. There's the word eros, there's the word phileo, and then there's the word agape. Let's work our way through each one of those words. And it's funny, there are three words, and each set of those words sort of mean different things. And so in the Hebrew language, can I get a napkin to wipe this stuff off here? Thank you. That's close enough. That's good enough. Don't worry about it. I'll work with it. In the Hebrew language, let me make sure that I got this right here. Yes. The Hebrew language, there's the word dot. Can you guys see that over here? No, you cannot? Oh, I'm sorry. Tell me when you guys can't see it on this side here, okay? Are you guys good? Okay, all right. There's the word dod in the Hebrew, and then there's the word eros in the Greek. Now, the word dod in the Hebrew language is really, it also means love. It really, both words actually in Hebrew and Greek kind of carry the same idea. The word dod refers to the physical and sexual qualities of a relationship. The word eros, which, by the way, we get the word erotic from, right? A lot of English language is derived from Greek, and so you might even recognize some of those words. But the word dod and the word eros really have this idea of a physical and sexual quality. Eros is used to express the sexual love or feeling of arousals that are shared between two people who are physically attracted to one another. It's not all sex, but it does talk about a strong physical attraction. And so these words are usually the sentiment that is expressed when one of your friends tells you that they are totally and forever in love with the guy or girl they just met 2 days ago. And they're the one. And here's the fact of the matter. It's usually a fleeting emotion. It's not substantive. Now, let me point this out. Dod and eros are important to have in a marriage. You need that for chemistry, right? For intimacy. That's important, right? You need to be attracted to who you're going to marry, right? And you're going to enjoy certain physical benefits of being together. However, it is dangerous. It is dangerous to build your marriage It is dangerous to build your marriage on this, solely this, because it doesn't last. In fact, after the first time you see each other naked, it's going to go downhill from there. It's very dangerous. You don't want to build your marriage on that. But it's the word. If you've ever wondered why certain celebrities, heck, why certain church people who seem so perfect for one another, get in a relationship rather quickly and break up rather quickly, there's a strong possibility that that relationship, all that they had in common, was an eros or a dod kind of love. Are you with me so far? In the Hebrew language, there's another word used to describe the affections that one has for another person. And the second level in the Hebrew is the word raya. Would y'all say that with me? Raya. In the Greek language, a comparable word would be the word phileo, which kind of sounds like or. There are a ton of words that could sound like that, right? Raya is often used to describe, the Hebrew word raya is often used to describe a friend or a companion, someone you enjoy hanging out with. And phileo, that speaks more of a warm affection shared between friends or family. It's another level of love, and neither of these are bad. They're just different expressions of how to show that you love someone. And so in Hebrew it's raya, in Greek it's phileo. Now, this is what's interesting about raya and phileo. It's usually what you're feeling when you're thinking about who to put on your guest list when you want to have a very small party and you only want your friends there. The emotions you go through when you try to filter that list is usually what's called raya or phileo, right? Because you're narrowing down your guest list to people that you really, really enjoy hanging out with. Or our modern day term would be raya is your BFF, right? It describes the feelings we have for people we really, really, really like being around. In fact, I want you guys to think about your friends. And generally, when you think about friends, there are certain friends whose names or faces, when you think about, just bring a smile to your face, aren't there? Right? Because they're, man, that's your boy, that's my girlfriend, right? Like those are people, not literally for you guys, but I mean for the girls, right? But those are people that you truly, truly enjoy spending time with, and the affections you have for those people, because you know they would do anything for you, right? That's usually described as raya. By the way, as Courtney pointed out, that is where we get the word Philadelphia from. And what's that word mean, Philadelphia? Brotherly love, right? And it's actually based on a story about two brothers back in biblical times. We're not going to get into that right now. But that's a new level of love, right? It speaks of a friendship, right? That speaks of a friendship kind of love. And then there's a third level, and I would propose that I think these last set of words in both languages convey the deepest, truest form of love. In Hebrew, the word ahava. Would you say that with me, please? Ahava. Absolutely. And in the Greek, what word will I be referring to? Agape. That's beautiful. Yeah, in Hebrew, ahava, which describes the love of the whale. In the Greek, in the Hebrew, it speaks of making an intentional choice to commit your life to another person. It's a beautiful picture. In the Greek, agape speaks of a sacrificial kind of love. And I love both pictures because I think if there's one Bible passage that describes these two levels of love, I think it's the passage, Romans chapter 5, verse 8, where it says this. How many of you guys know Romans 5:8? But God demonstrates his love in this, that while you and I were still sinners, Jesus died for us. What a picture of love. You ever thought about that passage and taking your time? It doesn't say, I love that because it says, basically it's saying while you're still caught up in your junk, Jesus died for us and said, I love you still. It always blows my mind away when I think about that passage. Ahava and agape have nothing to do with how you look, what you have, where you're from, or what you've done or will potentially do. Ahava and agape is initiated by the giver on the basis of the giver's own good nature with no expectation of repayment. I spent half of Friday trying to think of a modern day example and I couldn't come up with one. The most I could come up with was Les Miserables, and there's a scene in there, and I don't even think that even captures it, where Jean Valjean steals from one of the priests in the beginning, and really the priest really should report him to the law, and then the police catch Jean Valjean and they bring him back to the priest to press charges, and the priest basically says, it's okay, you know, it's not that bad, and they release Jean Valjean, and I love that picture, at least in one of the earlier movies. The priest actually takes the silver that Jean Valjean had stolen and gives it back to Jean Valjean and says, I have just purchased you with the blood of Christ, or something along those lines. Go and live now. And man, it's a beautiful, I don't even think it captures this, but I think that's the best I could do. Sacrificial love. Man, a marriage built on this is powerful. It's hard, but it's powerful. And this is the kind of love that Jesus Christ expressed towards Mary. It's important that you understand when you read Da Vinci Code and you read the Gnostic Gospels, they're saying this is what Jesus and Mary had. They just even bypass this one completely. And they say this is what they have. I would propose that Mary, of course she had a strong friendship with Jesus Christ, but I think Jesus expressed to her this kind of unconditional love. And here's the deal. The way you respond to this kind of love, devotion. It's worship. Not sex. And I think that's where the authors of the Gnostic Gospels got it really wrong. That's why later on in John chapter 20, verse 13 and 15, when Jesus Christ has died and his body's been buried and he's resurrected, and the next morning Mary Magdalene wakes up and she's looking for his body and she's by his grave and she doesn't find his body, and an angel shows up who actually turns out to be Jesus. She is so overwhelmed by pain that she says to him, they have taken my Lord, not my husband, Not my lover, my Lord. Where have you put him? So I can go find him and give him the proper burial, is really what she was getting at. In fact, I think it is a great insult to this great woman of faith to paint her as this, when in fact she had this with Jesus Christ. Christ expressed this to her, which resulted in worship and devotion. For those who desire to look for a romantic angle and still insist that Jesus and Mary being married is not such a bad thing, after all, it's good to be married. Here's the deal. I would respond by saying, first of all, there's no biblical basis for your argument, and so you're just making stuff up. Secondly, it is not romantic to suggest that the Son of God married and had a child. That's not romantic. You know what that is? That's blasphemy. It's not hypocrisy. That's blasphemy. That is blasphemy. Because you're speaking with contempt about God, and you're defiantly and irreverently saying things about the Bible that God has clearly said is not the case. And so it's blasphemous what Dan Brown says and proposes. It's blasphemous what the Gnostic Gospels say about Jesus and Mary. And you know what else? The idea that God would come and have a kid with a human is not biblical theology. You know what that is? That's Greek philosophy. And that's probably what their writings are based on. You can either choose to believe the biblical account of who Mary is, or you can jump on the bandwagon of those headline news. And so the question is, I love the song that says, I am a friend of God. God called Abraham a friend of God. And I think that as you grow to know Jesus Christ, I think you grow in friendship with him, and then you ultimately grow to recognize he's Lord. But here's what's important. The same love that Jesus showed Mary, once again, which love did Jesus show Mary? Was it this? Was it this? It was an ahava kind of love, an agape kind of love. Here's the deal. It's the same kind of love that Jesus showed you and I when the Bible says he demonstrates his love for us, that while you were still in sin, while you were still sinners, Jesus Christ died for you. And it's a fascinating thought that your sin, think about this for a second, your sin, the sin you have not yet committed, that you're going to commit sometime next week, tomorrow, tonight, somehow, because you belong to Jesus Christ, will never show up when you stand before God. I can't wrap my mind around that. I'll tell you why I can't wrap my mind around it, because it always comes to my mind. My sin is always before me. And somehow when we stand before God and our lives are reviewed, all of that will matter. Every internal sin, every lie, hypocrisy, judgmentalism, every porneia sin, right? That porneia really describes the whole sexual gamut, everything. Hatred, jealousy, coveting, it'll never show up. Isn't that a fascinating thought? How do you respond to a God who says, I love you in spite of you? There's only one response. It's worship. A life of devotion. You live your life for him daily. So that whenever you walk into sin, and I hate calling it fall into sin, I'd rather, whenever we walk open-eyed into sin, we recognize what it is, call it what it is, we confess it, we come back to God. And we live a life of worship, a life of devotion.